Thanks for volunteering.
Enjoy our meeting.
Gets here in 2.5, 3 hours. There's water in the corner.
Should at least put a candy jar out or something.
Yeah. We have like a snack machine over there. Popcorn.
She's all set with the video.
We're at the whim of the chairman.
So we're gonna just wait real quick for a phone call and have her come back in, and then we'll start. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Another minute.
Maybe you could take something, if he can, you know, we sent out the message and I just heard from Bill like an hour ago, so. We could maybe start with something else and we would get a quorum. I don't know, let's see what she says.
Right, okay.
We got stuff to do.
No, I know.
I meant that in a. We have time.
We could.
We've got other stuff we can do.
Yes, sir.
Did I tell you I met a guy who's gonna do maple syrup?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I'll have to put you two in touch.
There's only a few of us.
He's just getting into it.
I
said, "Oh, I know somebody who's been doing that for years."
That was held last
Two.
Friday.
I've been doing it for two. I'm an old pro.
I thought you told me your family did it for years.
Yeah, that's not me though.
Is it a secret family recipe?
My cousin's been doing it for 40, 50 years.
Oh, there you go. Close enough.
You're supposed to kind of just, through osmosis at holidays and stuff, supposed to just sort of pick it up somehow, I think.
In the family.
It's the French Canadian blood. You just know where the syrup is.
I know nothing about syrup, but I was thinking about syrup people.
Why, don't all the trees have syrup?
No.
All maple trees do, don't they?
Pine trees.
Sugar maples.
Different
Sugar
concentrations.
maples were
I
your
think they
best
make
bet.
even birch.
Sugar maples make the
Not very
syrup
good, no.
more sweet than just
Doesn't
regular
sound very
maple.
good.
Nice.
My husband has been doing it for a few years now.
There you go.
See, there's a lot of us.
You can start a whole club.
Lori Reed, she's like, I have a maple tree. Can I do it? I showed her how to do it. She's like, oh, that was easy.
Yeah, but you gotta have the stuff, right?
You need a lot of trees. You can't
Yeah.
have one tree.
Yeah.
Like,
She
suck
did.
that
She
big
did one
dry.
tree. She made like a little thing of syrup. I only do 15.
Here, yay!
Can't help her now.
We need you, you're a quorum.
She's like, I'm gonna do that too. I'm like, I don't doubt it.
All right, so 6:35, we're gonna open up the meeting. This meeting is being broadcast live and digitally recorded, as usual. And we'll start with open session. Is anybody here for open session? Seeing none, we'll move on to announcements. What do we got, Ryan?
So we're getting close to the end for people who want to participate in our Frozen Assets special event. This is where folks, if they're willing to donate $20 or if they're not, they can still participate to take 5 guesses on when the outhouse that's located on the Williamsville Pond by Country Hen will fall through the ice. So it's kind of a
They should
indicator.
hurry up this year.
Yeah,
Could
it might
be
not
any
last.
day.
Saying next week is gonna be in the 50s.
Yep.
So there's 3 more days on that. We'll post on social media tomorrow for sure. So get your guesses in, support the special events in town, and it's a fun competition. We'll make sure we're posting many pictures of, maybe early February, hopefully, when winter's over. So
Who's watching the outhouse?
I believe it's a super high-tech live feed, and we want to get to the point of that, but
Now it's just hitting hope.
Katie would know who's monitoring it. But it
She's
is
got a few kids. She's just gonna put one of the kids in front of it, man. She's just gonna be like, "You're not moving."
I get it. Yeah. Watching them.
They take shifts.
You get night watch.
I believe there's I don't want to misspeak, but a clock
There's a
in there
timer that'll.
that when it hits the water, it stops.
Shuts off, yeah.
So they know exactly when
Wow.
she started through. And then the Valentine's Day roast beef dinner supporting the Hubbardston Scholarship Committee is February 15th from 5 to 8 at the Rod and Gun Club here in Hubbardston. The Green family, especially Joyce with all her retirement time now, is going to be providing music. The tickets are $12 for adults, $6 for children if you buy them in advance, which we recommend you do. And then at the door, it's $14 for adults and $8 for children. So, day after Valentine's Day, so you can double up the date.
All right. Do you want to give us a quick little synopsis on your MMA visit, or are you going to do that somewhere later on?
Oh, sure. So this weekend was the annual MMA trade conference. It's most towns send reps, ranging from staff to elected officials. There's obviously a lot of state officials and state reps there, primarily focused on training and also learning from each other. But
Excuse, MMA stands for what?
Mass Municipal Association.
Mass Municipal. Okay, thank you.
So the governor and lieutenant governor spoke about initiatives coming up. They'd already released the governor's budget, which we have now. So they were explaining some of those aspects. I was telling Pat that they're going to, or recommending in the governor's budget, that more money be put into the Cannabis Control Commission to try and speed up some licensure. Talked a lot about affordable housing, which we're going to talk about later, and green initiatives, which we're going to talk about later as well, curbing climate change through MVP and green community type programs. And was able to definitely network with our regional peers and just talk about opportunities for strengthening the Quabbin region and making sure that we're taking advantage of all possible partnerships. So it was pretty good.
Any good swag?
I'm not a swag guy. They give you like a bag to
Yeah,
go
but you got
around with
kids.
it.
You can grab like
I know, but some people, like, it was falling out of their bag as they were leaving there.
little footballs and
I
stuff.
think I took a pen. Yeah.
Alright.
So who was invited to this? All town
You-
administrators?
You were invited as well.
Yeah, I couldn't make it though. Thanks for going in my
Yes, so we are members of the Mass Municipal Association as town staff and elected officials. And they advocate for things like additional Chapter 90 money and school funding and the other things that are important. So kind of our professional and lobbying arm at the same time.
Excellent.
Okay, sounds good. So we have we're up to presentations here. Item 3.
There are none today.
We have none. Item 4, new business. So we've got quorums for the 3 committees here. So we've got a community benchmarking joint meeting with the select board, the planning board, and the FinCom.
We're
So
gonna do the
Yeah, we're
appointment
gonna do that
first.
first.
Yeah.
we are. So I'll just introduce something we're gonna wait on for a second. And we're gonna jump down to item 8D, which is the appointment of Danielle Jardina to the Economic Development Committee.
So this committee is filling fast, a lot of interest. We've been doing a lot of local tours. They're your recommendation arm for local economic development, and they are recommending Danielle join their group. And she's excited to do so, she told me.
I am.
Yeah.
All right, well, we appreciate you volunteering, and I agree. I think we've seen, a fair amount of momentum from this group, and this just only helps, so thanks for joining in.
You're welcome, thank you.
So I'll make the motion to appoint Danielle to the Economic Development Committee.
I'll second it.
Discussion? All in favor?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
sounds
That's
good.
it. That is it.
All right, so back to new business, which is the community benchmarking joint meeting. We have 3 quorums, is that correct?
Yes.
All right, that's good to see, and 3 meetings posted.
Yes.
Okay, sounds good, just making sure we get that before we move forward. All right, Ryan, how do you want to start this off?
So benchmarking is a municipal government best practice specifically targeting in Massachusetts, a training that we've had. The idea behind benchmarking is a community would not just think about itself when making decisions, but what towns it compares itself to, its neighbors for sure, those towns that are similarly sized, and those aspirational towns too. So you don't want to just look at towns that you are or are considering yourself stronger than. You also want to look at those towns you want to be like and emulate. So the exercise here is for 3 different points of view to discuss what they believe our peer towns are. And then if we can, at some point, it doesn't have to be tonight, this is certainly the intro discussion, come up with a finalized list of towns that we compare ourselves to. And then this is a market basket of towns that all these committees and boards can tell me or the staff, go get us information from our market basket about X, Y, or Z. So you can picture if you were hiring a new police chief, we're not doing that, I'm just doing hypothetically. You'd go to your market basket towns and compare salaries, or if you're doing your wage analysis, you would compare how much people are paid in your community, to tax rate, to understanding overrides, how much things cost. All these different data points is just another way for us to make decisions. It's probably a little too soon in this, but I could picture the town administrator's budget having a section called benchmarking, so we can compare budget growth and other data points for your decision making during the budget process. So we did ask the finance committee to give their worldview on what Hubbardston is similar to, in the planning board as well did theirs. So two different perspectives. One's looking at growth, bylaws, different ways to manage people coming into town. The finance committee, as you can imagine, is mostly focused on the financial indicators. And then this board would be looking at policy and direction and overall vision.
And I think fees too,
Yes.
for permits and other things like that. You know, I think, we've done this, I don't know how much research you got into it, but we did do this some amount of years ago. I can't remember exactly what it was, but we did have a discussion. We didn't formalize it as much as this, but we did do some of these evaluations that sort of, some of it had to do with, figuring out where employee step positions should be and all that, as we sort of made sure we were in the ballpark for being competitive with our neighboring towns.
So, not sure who wants to go first, but the other boards did a great job of spending some time on this. I met with each one of them to talk about the process, and they took it from there. So each has a presentation, and then that might facilitate a small discussion, and then in the future, maybe we finalize a list.
All right, well, planning board is listed first on our agenda, so do you mind?
That's fine. I'm
Okay.
gonna let Christina run it, because she was our tabulator.
Sounds good?
Is that all right with you?
Of course.
The process and, are you
Okay.
ready? Okay.
Yes, as I stated, here we go. As I stated in an email to the Board of Selectmen,
Christy, you want to come up to the table?
yeah, I can.
Yeah, come on. We can fill in, but she can give you an overview of what we did.
We don't need to squeeze that.
Forgive me, I just need my phone on me. I just got a note that my daughter is not doing well.
Oh.
Okay, as I stated to an email to the Board of Selectmen about 2 months ago, our benchmarking process was a little bit detailed. At first, we didn't have a clear understanding of how we wanted to present benchmarking. What we wanted to conduct is our attributes with regards to what makes a town great. So, Ryan, would you put up the chart I sent you in an email?
This one?
No, the other one.
The one you just sent me?
Yes, thank you. So we had a meeting discussing what attributes we felt would make Hubbardston a great town, or any town a great town. And the planning board settled on the following 8: amenities and arts, business opportunities, municipal services, open space, schools, town center, and workforce housing or affordable housing. Those 8 attributes are what they wanted to look at qualitatively on what makes a town a good place to live. We understand that finance was looking at numbers and how we compare financially to other towns, but the planning board wanted to look at the less quantitative aspects. You know, how do they rank in the arts, business opportunities? And so each member of the planning board went home with the list that we had established of surrounding communities. We wanted to use geographically local communities so that other people, when they were looking at this list, could say, oh, I know what that town looks like. They could say, oh, we do want to be like them because we know where they are and what they look like. We didn't want to pick someone way on the East Coast or somewhere that people locally have never been. So we took our geographically local towns and they rated each one 1 through 5. Each member of the board went home and did this, and then all of that information was put into some data, and we got our top 5 towns.
So least
Would be a
important-
1.
Least important to the town, or least?
No,
least
the way we
what?
did it, and if you'll scroll to the bottom, Ryan, please.
Sure.
Thank you. The way we did it is I asked each member, please fill these spaces in with a 1 to 5 scale. 1 is least attractive,
Yeah.
or you do not want to be like. 3 is neutral, or 5 is most attractive, you want to be like. Please put NA if you have no information or opinion. And the scores were done both regularly and then weighted, because some people did put NA, and I didn't want those towns to suddenly get all 5s because nobody had any information and then one person did. I have done data analysis in the past, so we did it both ways.
Clearly.
And And believe it or not, the scores came out about the same either way you looked at it. The end result was that the 5 towns that the planning board felt they wanted to set as their benchmark were Ashburnham, Barry, Princeton, Sterling, and Westminster. And again, these were based on all of those criteria, not just the numbers, but on the arts, on the business opportunities, how we feel we want to grow. And it was taken from the 5 opinions of the planning board. So I think that had a nice spread of how people would view it. Some of them are more business-minded, some of them are more arts and open space-minded. So that's the list we started from. Obviously, we have the other numbers there because we knew that there was a possibility we would have to choose more than 5. And because we didn't know how many the finance committee would be bringing to the table, but that's the criteria and how we established the 5 towns we came up with.
So how did you get the information about a said town to make that decision about it? Is it just knowledge of the town, general knowledge of the town, or?
Each member did it differently. This is, they were tasked with doing it themselves. So business opportunities might be you've been to the town, so you know what business opportunities are there. Some people I know did Google searches. If they weren't as familiar with the town, and some people put NA if they had no information with regards to that town.
There was some data in it. For example, school ratings are pretty easily to look at on the internet. Number of housing units is, you know, the SHI for, like, you know, what are they doing in that grounds. Although really in housing is a little bit, workforce housing is also moderate income, but it's people in the workforce, so it's an affordable element to it. So there were some things for which data was available, but a lot of it was kind of impressions and visible, and you know, from what towns do you gravitate to, and because we didn't think it, I mean, you could have, we didn't think the assignment was to like compare, you know, zoning bylaws, but it was really a broader vision thing, so.
No, but it could be
Well,
used
so-
for that. Right, so for examining bylaws, and these are the towns that you aspirationally wanna be, those are the bylaws you kinda gather, so you can look to see if your bylaws are allowing you to be as open or closed as those towns want you
And
to
it
be.
can be an easy as an evaluation of what % of the town is under this amount of zoning versus this zoning and this zoning versus the ones that we have these favorable, you know, attributes given to them on this, so yeah, I understand.
Something else to look at when you mention schools is not just the rank, but also the time it takes to get to school is also a factor when people move to, like I say, Hubbardston. If they know there's a 45-minute to an hour ride to high school back and forth each way, they may not, you know.
It was hard. We
Yeah.
spent more time debating on how we would do criteria, I think, than
doing it.
Well, that, I mean, it's true, Jamie, right, but every one of those that's up there is a regional school district, so it's at least one sort of, you know, that, I'm not saying I have any idea how long it takes to go to each one, but at least they are, that the ones in yellow are all regional school districts in one
Yeah,
shape.
but is the high school is in Ashburnham, right?
It's
It's Ashburnham, Westminster.
Oakmont?
Oakmont?
Yeah.
Oakmont is.
Sure, I'm just
And then
overall.
there's also the water and sewer issue, like the Ashburnham has water and sewer, we don't, Barry has water and sewer, we don't.
Not
Princeton
for all of it
doesn't.
though, for some of the towns,
Yeah,
so, yeah.
Westminster does. But yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah.
It's difficult.
Okay.
So then Christina did put together this, which I found to be interesting.
It is interesting, yeah, this is
Just
new to
the
me
map.
today, too.
When I got the information from the finance committee, I wanted to see if we overlapped. So the ones with the tiger stripes, forgive me, I didn't know this was going to be posted at the meeting.
Here it is.
Are the ones that we agreed on, the 4. Number 5 is Westminster. That's the one in pink. That's the one that only the planning board selected, and all the other ones in orange are all the finance committees. Because as I said, we went by geographic location, so we had no outliers really, because we weren't looking at purely numbers or financial. And we actually didn't include the ones that are in Western Mass in our, because we had nothing to go by unless we went by a purely Google search. Because most people have never been to, well, of the planning board, a lot of them haven't been to like Lee and Lennox. But I just found this helpful. That way people could look at it and see, you know, where the overlap was.
Great. Okay, thanks for that. All right, you guys wanna come on up from the finance to talk about?
Can I beam to that Chromecast thing on the?
You're on the town Wi-Fi.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, you need to be on SladeNet.
Yep, there we go, I think. It says Office TV.
Yeah, that's
So,
it. Are you hijacking?
so there we go, yeah.
You've been hacked.
Hawaii.
Watch out for him.
Yeah.
Remember that if my presentations are on.
He just pulled something on us and we don't know what it was.
I just downloaded everything, yeah. So we came up with a list of towns. We actually kind of presumably went overboard, and we came up with 15. This was back in the spring, so forgive me if I don't remember the details. These are the 15 towns in alphabetical order, and then I'll talk about sort of how we got to these 15 towns. As was mentioned, definitely looks like there's some overlap. The first thing that we did was with our methodology, not necessarily looking geographically, but looking sort of from a population standpoint. If you take all of the towns in Massachusetts, we limited our search or our criteria to towns between 2,500 and 8,500, which is about 50% of what our population is now, to about 200% of what our population is now. Figuring that towns that were much larger than that would be, it would be comparing apples to oranges, or towns that are much smaller than that, same thing. So we wanted to try to at least keep it focused on that range. Then the criteria that we were looking at, mainly from the financial perspective, was looking at single-family tax bill, income per capita, the EQV per capita, which is sort of like the total assessed value of the town, land area, population density, to again get a sense of, you mentioned, sort of travel to school, but again, how rural perhaps the town is. Looking at tax levy, total budget, and then the residential tax rate. So what we did, there's 87 towns that fall into that initial criteria of the 2,500 to 8,500. Is we calculated what's called a z-score. A z-score is basically looking at the number of standard deviations away from the average. If you take those 87 towns, you figure out what the average is for each of those criterias, and then you calculate how far each of those towns is from the average. We then scaled that to Hubbardston. We set Hubbardston at 0, saying Hubbardston is the average, so how far are all the other towns from Hubbardston in each of those criterias? And then if you add them all up, you essentially get the sum of how far a town is from Hubbardston on those 6 or 7 criteria, whatever we had. Just looking at it, so Hubbardston would obviously have a score of 0. Towns in that 87 that were least like us had scores of 21 to 24, and those I think we would all throw out. Those are on the Cape, Chatham, Edgartown's, Martha's Vineyard. I mean, those are towns that we would not really put ourselves in the category of. So you can see sort of how that affected us. Those towns are least like us. So these are the z-scores for the 15 towns that we had come up with, along with the rank being how close they are to Hubbardston. And so if you put them sort of in sort of a ascending order, the town that is most like us based on that criteria is Brimfield, Barry, and Princeton. So those we definitely put on the list. We started then weighting towns based on, if you looked at certain, so how far was any one super duper far, so 2 or 3 standard deviations away from us, but maybe like us in all other categories. So something like Brookfield is like us in everything except for just land area. It is just, I guess, presumably, I don't know if it's larger or smaller than us, but is unlike us in just one category. The orange shows between 1 and 2 standard deviations away, and then anything red is more than 2 standard deviations away. 2 standard deviations would be a very significant deviation from what we are. And then after that, we sort of looked at, so we had that objective criteria, and then I think as a committee, we sort of had some aspirational. There was that aspirational sort of category which. We had put some towns on that may not be sort of scoring wise the most like us, but people felt like were maybe nice towns that we would perhaps want to emulate. So that's how we essentially came up with some of the lower ranked ones, were I think some of the ones that sort of fell into that more aspirational category. But that was the 15 that we've come up with.
All right. Well, I like that the processes were so very different, because they were. I mean, there was, I know there's some aspiration stuff in there that you just talked about, which is less analytical than the rest of it. But overall, it's really nice to have, and especially with the map showing where there was an alliance between the two, really gives us a sort of level of comfort that there's a core group of towns that make sense for this evaluation without question. So anyway, so Ryan, wanna just go over those again?
Sure, the towns again?
Yeah, just the two lists, if we could.
Okay. So the
So
first.
can I ask a question before we do that? What was the, so you got the Z-score rank, what was the high end of the Z-score rank?
So the high end were the towns that were least, the larger the number, the farther away
Right.
you are. So the towns at the high end, I mean, I have a list of all.
What were the
87
high end numbers?
Oh, the high end numbers were 21 to 25, the total score.
Okay.
So with, I think there were, I forget how many criteria there were, 10 criteria, so they were more than 2 standard deviations away on average in each category from us to get to the score of 20 or 25.
And what was the highest score of the original 78 towns?
The highest score was, Cohasset at 23.6. Dover was the second highest. So yeah, the top, the 5 towns least like us: Lincoln, Chatham, Edgartown, Dover, and Cohasset. So those were.
No brainer, no brainer, no brainer, no brainer, no brainer.
Just to verify the system that you've created, yeah.
We talked about this in some of the trainings this weekend as well. So there are towns with 6 square miles is the size of the town, with 20 miles of roads. They get 1.5 million in Chapter 90 money, whereas we are 41 square miles, 88 miles of road, and 395,000 this year of Chapter 90. So it's good. This exercise is good to place us in context, because a lot of people will say we're like this town or we're not like this town, and that's so subjective. When you have a statistical analysis like this, you can see we are more similar to Templeton and Princeton than we think we are, and maybe not so much like Edgartown, Chatham, or somebody. I'm exaggerating, but depending on how you look at it.
Another thing also is like the land area. Like we have 10,000 acres permanently protected. So if you have another town that doesn't have watershed, they may have more potential for development. And you know, there's the wetlands factor, and then the size of the business district also. Like Alice was saying, Paxton, they don't have very much room in their business district because it drops off into wetlands, and that's why they may have limited development. You know, so that there's just so many factors, you know, wetlands, business district, and then you could have a large business district, but if it's wet, you can't build, you know, there's no room for expansion. And then acreage, how much of it is protected cannot be developed, you know, watershed.
And I did talk about that too. I said,
Yeah.
when I was comparing towns with other people, we were doing this exercise, and I said one of my select board members would say, yeah, we have all this land, but half of it is sealed off from us, and we don't have the ability to use it. So they say, I'd kill for that. I'm like, would you?
Maybe not.
So just because we need to state it, so we just lost a quorum, right?
No, she's
No,
in
that was
staff.
Christina.
Oh, okay, so she's not.
He's our admin.
Admin, so, okay, good. So the next step on this is to basically make a decision to pick the towns and then move forward with the study?
Yeah, or what you want to do with this info now that you have it. To, I mean, ideally, you would pick some cool round number like 10, but it can be 15, it can be 5, it can be.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
The one town that the planning board had, if you don't mind telling me what it was, so I can look up to see where it would score on our system.
It was
That might
Westminster.
Be, it was Oh, you know what? Westminster might have been too large, so it wouldn't have fit in the. Yeah, I think Westminster. Yeah, I don't think Westminster's on our list. It's bigger than 8,500. Yeah.
Is it really? Westminster's got more than 8,500?
Oh no, it is no Westminster is it is on ours. It
I just
is
feel like they have more money.
number 35.
They're more business.
A lot more business, and Route 2, and,
Yeah,
and
it
a
ranks-
landfill,
oh,
and so many
it
different
ranks as
things.
36.
Brewery.
Excuse me.
Water and
So
sewer.
36 is their rank, which
36
them,
is their
so
rank.
they had some of those things where it has, you know, multiple standard
Did I say
deviations.
that out loud?
They were closer than some of the. We had some on our like Lee and Lennox or something, and Great Barrington. Westminster is much more like us than those towns.
Okay.
And Jamie,
We
we
put
share,
in some actually good size, like Fitchburg is in our list, was in our original list.
Oh, yeah.
we share more in common with Berkshire towns in terms of school transportation and space problems than we do even Central Mass, never mind Eastern Mass. So some of the planning problems that we have are hard to negotiate because of that. really big town with not a lot in it, so, which is good and bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so, I don't think we're gonna necessarily pick them right now. I think we've got some information to sort of chew on and sort of go from there, but regardless of that, so let's just say we have the next step after we sort of choose what our focus group, for lack of a better way of saying it, is going to be, will be what?
To use that data set however you choose. I would use definitely for budget analysis and research to see where we fit, provide a report to all committees on that. Comparing how much we spend in certain areas to make sure we're not out of whack with those that we want to be. And then I would definitely suggest to the planning board that they review these aspirational towns of this list, how we compare, so that if, say, the Economic Development Committee made X recommendation, can we use that information to shape policies so that we become more like that town or not?
Yep.
Sign bylaw is a great example that's being discussed at the planning board level. And you hear, are we a business-friendly town? Well, this is a way to figure that out with data, to support or not support, and then maybe decide what you want to do with that.
So I guess, we're all talking here, anybody chime in obviously at any point, but, I guess my initial thought would be to go somewhere in that range of 10, because I think it's as valuable as it is to have these really, really close and neighboring towns for evaluation. When we're doing something like this, it's also good to have, alternative sort of areas to be able to grasp from and say, okay, hey, they're doing it better, or is that, whatever, instead of just focusing on the area that already exists. So I think that sort of, bumping it out a little bit to include not all, but some of the other ones that makes most sense, is probably a good idea.
I wanna make one point, which John just raised. We scored Hubbardston in this, if you see it's in the list, and it's 2.9.
Yeah, I saw that.
So the ones that are scoring below 2.9 are the towns we don't wanna be like, and the ones, so don't just take our big list, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can take the ones that are,
We intentionally picked towns that
Right.
we didn't want to be like, to specify that we didn't want to be like those towns
Okay.
when we were doing our thought process.
it's been a while, I've forgotten that that's the way it
Yes.
was. So don't pick anything that
Right,
rates
like we-
below Hubbardston on this
Right.
list.
We
Start
put
with-
Fitchburg because we did not want to be like Fitchburg.
Right. So it should be three and over would be considered our desirable list,
Which is most of the list.
which is most of the list.
Okay. All right. And it should, just a couple, 3 or 4 others. Okay, all right, well, I guess thanks, unless anyone else has anything to add to this now. We have, some information which we already had to sort of chew on here and take the next step, so, thanks.
Great.
Good with you, Ryan?
Yes.
Okay, sounds good.
A lot of this stuff applies to everyone, so Finance Committee, are you leaving? Because I just have one matter to discuss before you leave, so.
Yeah, that's great work, good job, thanks for doing that. That's a lot of insight into that project.
Be helpful,
So
I agree.
I know not all your members are here. I did send out information to the Board of Selectmen about this, but we had a cruiser engine 2, died, and I sent this information to you as well. So it's unexpected that the cruiser is now incapacitated. We're also waiting delivery of a new cruiser, which should happen by the end of this week, but it puts us down to 2 cruisers, and that's not good for wear and tear. They're designed to rotate a little bit more than that, not that we have a giant fleet. So the options are to stress our fleet until we get to town meeting and order a new one, which would cut into our capital plan that's already sort of been developed, or to repair this one. I'm not a mechanic, but most of the information I'm getting from the mechanic, the DPW, and others is that this should last the 2 years plus that it's supposed to for the recycle a repair. However, it would be $9,400 is the estimate we have for everything. That includes some suspension work as well. And we would need a reserve fund transfer of $7,600 to complement what the police have left in their vehicle maintenance to cover that. So you don't have a full committee here, so I don't want to put you on the spot, but we were looking for a reserve fund transfer for that.
Do you want us to discuss it, or?
Discuss it, tell me that you'll wait till you have full committee, or say yes.
Maybe we should reserve fund pretty close, I thought, with our at our last, the budget for the FY20 budget. So I'd just be concerned, obviously, that I think it was down to 25,000 from 35,000 or something like that.
Started at 30, it's at, we've used 16, we're down to 14.
Right, we're down, so we'd be using half of that,
Mm.
for that, but.
Ironically, we barely used it last year, so surprise, FY20.
I mean, we should probably discuss it with Susan, I guess, I mean, kind of have to do it, I would assume.
Well, I think the question is,
Oh, yeah.
Well,
Should we make a motion then to approve the transfer from the reserve fund? I'll make that motion, I guess.
Yep. I'll second it.
Any more discussion about it? Does anyone, I mean, you guys have any further, I mean, I'm in favor of doing it, I
When
don't
was
see
that?
we have another choice.
So that's scheduled to be replaced in 2 years anyways, that,
That cruiser, yeah.
so this will carry it another 2 years.
Yeah, so you're spending 10 to survive 2, in a normal 5-year cycle, of a
So
$45,000 cruiser, so it does make sense if everything holds, which it never does.
You say that, but this is like the first time this sort of thing has happened in the 7 years I've been doing this. That it just so happens that something failed, and it happens, right?
Yeah,
So,
I mean, we gotta.
I mean, it's
And
not
then
like
they-
one of these things that just constantly happens that we're
Right.
just gonna expect it to happen 3 months from now again. It's just sort of random.
and we're kinda not talking about repairing something that we were planning to replace in 6 months.
Right.
It's-
Yep.
I think.
So I guess all in favor? That's our discussion?
Yep.
So I'll coordinate with Susan for signature, just wanted to, we need to publicly discuss it, so, thank you.
Okay. Anything else you wanna?
Hope it doesn't snow.
Yes, no more snow, please.
No more snow.
Not with the FinCom specifically, no.
Okay. All right, so we'll move on then. We'll move on to new business, item B, which is the discussion of the host community agreement. Royalston Farm LLC, Paper Crane Provisions LLC, and Paper Crane Provisions Inc.
Okay, so to establish what is known, when we had our community out, when the developers here had their community outreach meeting, 'cause it's not ours, it's theirs, they were also discussing 26 Worcester Road, which has been since removed from the table. So the only 2 remaining are the ones on your agenda tonight. So the reason why there are 5 different addresses listed is because they're proposing 5 different marijuana establishments. I know that's confusing to some, but in order for them to go and get licensure for any of them, they need to have a host community meeting and a host community agreement in place. So it is unlikely that there would be 5 new establishments in town, but they're setting the stage to get, I've called it before, throwing a lot against the wall to hopefully get some agreements in place. Each establishment requires its own HCA, so we would be discussing 5 different host community agreements. What the host community agreement is, boiled into one nutshell, is an agreement between the organization and the town for you to bring this establishment, this special type of establishment into the town. You are agreeing to the following stipulations, which is what the agreement lays out. That's not approving it. That is saying that you are now able to go forward into our town and discuss how to license and go through the zoning process with the planning board, etc. So the agreements have to be made before that process can continue, and there's some to say that it can't stop at this point unless there's absolutely no way to agree between the provisions. So they do have to negotiate with us in order to come in.
So, I guess a few important things are, we're working off of a template that many other places have already used. I guess that would be the way to establish it first off. Second is our council has already reviewed it in detail and given their comments to us on the sort of 2 types of agreement. We have cultivation and retail establishment agreements, so there's 2 different ones. Out of the 5, I think 1 is retail and 4 are cultivation, so a lot of similarities between the 2. So, but overall, it's sort of all over the agreement. The 20 pages or so each one is how this is basically just only applicable if the CCC, which is the Cannabis Commission, actually grants some sort of a license. And there's language in there about if it doesn't happen within 18 months, we can cancel it or extend it. I mean, there's lots of provisions in there, in addition to the stipulations of payment, that are, you know, I would say solely or close to solely for protection of the town. So, you know, I've reviewed it. I actually have a couple comments. I don't know if there's something to discuss tonight or what, but it's just as far as the agreement drafts that we're looking at.
So there's some decision points to make and then a timeline to establish.
Okay.
So some general points from training and council. The agreements, they can't grant us less than they did in other communities, so they build on each other. That also means that they're kind of the same. So you can ask for stuff, but a lot of it is under legal challenge. So you can't just ask for everything to de facto ban someone. And a lot of the stuff can be challenged in court as well. So if we go too far with it, it's probably not a good idea. Meaning, you know, you need to give us $1 million to fund our capital plan for the next 5 years is not going to fly on its face. There's also some debate. So there's a community impact fee of 3%. So this was granted by the Cannabis Control Commission as a way for these establishments to come into towns and some of the ancillary costs that are around that to cover for that. So we need to prove that there's a, say, up to 3%, which is one of the decision points, impact in our town in order to hold them to that fee. So that means anything they make, we'd get 3% of that in order to help defray the cost of having them in our town. There's quite a bit of debate as to whether or not legally that'll hold up past the 5-year agreement. And if you ask for anything above the 3%, so any extras in your contract, whether or not that's in the 3% or out of the 3% is being challenged in court constantly. Okay, so just wanted to give some parameters for this debate.
So at the, you know, towards the end of our outreach meeting that we had last time, the discussion was, okay, what's the next step going to be? This is the next step, where it's a draft, host community agreement. Now, you know, part of also the discussion at that time was, okay, well, what could stop it at that time? And, you know, could the select board stop it at that time? You know, does it have to move forward here? And it was, you know, sort of a tough one to answer. And I guess the answer is kind of yes. And we could kind of almost filibuster our way out of it by asking for crazy things just to get this in the cycle of appeal, right? The cycle of, you know, sort of fighting against it. So, you know, that's an option if we wanted to do it. So, you know, in thinking those sorts of ways, actually asked Ryan, who then asked the town clerk to get the results of all of the recent town meeting and ballot question votes that the town has made on this over the last couple of years, just so we had that information. And you know, it's clear from all of them, because they were all yeses, you know, typically 60-40, yes, no, somewhere in that sort of range, that the town has always and consistently, since this process was begun, voted for this, right? And so, you know, taking all the sort of personal opinion away, which is hard to do on such a sort of emotional topic, from looking at it in a sort of strictly, you know, listening to the constituency sort of standpoint, you know, this is the next step in the process of you know, bringing something that the town wants and has voted multiple times that they want to fruition. So I guess I just want to say that out loud, you know, as we're sort of, you know, debating on sort of how to move forward with how to address the draft here, which, you know, no decisions are necessarily being made tonight, but I think that was an important thing to hear, is although we know it's reinforced by the review of those results. And these weren't, and again, just looking at, you know, one of them that came in today, which was a vote on an establishment of you know, this potential coming into town. It wasn't one of those elections where, you know, 300 people voted. It was a 2,600 or something. It was a really high percentage of the town. So even that factoring in too, because that matters, is like, you know, how many people showed up. Was it a you know, a wintry day for, you know, some special town meeting no one showed up for? No, it was like an election for a president or something, you know, that sort of thing, where people were there and focused and had the question in front of them to look, and still overwhelmingly said yes. So that's just sort of 2 cents on that.
Could we get that in an email, just the election results for that, just so we have it?
Sure.
Sure.
Please.
What happened to the third proposed location? Why is that off the table?
From what I understand, it's just an email between Damon, who was quasi-involved. He was negotiating with one person, and another person who definitely owns the lot wasn't involved in that negotiation. And he said there was a miscommunication, and he, at this time, didn't want to engage with that to do more research, so they dropped it off the table.
Alice and I received a letter at the end of the outreach meeting from somebody who said, who apparently, again, not all of this has been corroborated, but who owned or had ownership rights to one of the properties that said, I don't know what's going on here, I've never been contacted. So there was obviously something that you know, wasn't clear to somebody.
It was a family trust situation. So they were, both the person Damon was talking to and the other family member were members of the family, but only one was a trustee, so it's something that needs to be sorted out, so they just withdrew it till it was sorted out.
Right.
And basically, the lady wrote us the letter, we spoke to her. Her concern is it's a restoration of this pit, and she wants to see that done first. So I think, before she commits it to anything else.
So it's completely off the table, so I don't feel
Okay.
comfortable. Obviously give that information, but it's like it never happened in terms of my involvement. Okay, so the process, so what this is not, the hosted community agreement is not go and establish your marijuana establishment. This is a step in the process. If at any point the person coming into town violates any of the CCC statutes or doesn't comply with the planning board or any of those other things, then it doesn't happen. So this is just kind of the initial negotiation of what it would look like if you came here. And I think that's confusing to some because it feels like a contract, but this is just, in order to even discuss coming into our town, we first need to agree. That's what an HCA is.
Okay.
So these are fairly standard. KP Law, our town council has done, I don't want to say hundreds, but at least dozens of these. I've talked to them at length to educate myself and to understand, and our neighboring communities, I've reviewed all of theirs. Barry has signed several HCAs. They don't have any establishments yet. Gardner obviously had to do it to have their establishments.
Do you review any of the ones that these companies are involved with? I know they said they have one in Phillipston, Templeton.
So Templeton, we had town council review,
Mhm.
and they used it to compare to their template.
This is closest to Templeton, I think, it feels like.
Yes.
It's all over the sort of
Okay.
comments from
Yeah.
council.
And that was this group's initial offering was, we'll give you everything that you gave Templeton. So included in that is the 3% impact fee. They established that, so I recommend that this board consider a 3%.
So the 3% impact fee is of gross sales.
In any gross sales, different
Okay.
than the retail sales tax, which applies only to the commercial sale from business to consumer. So in a retail store.
And it's 5 years.
Yes. In a retail store, you would get 6%. You would get 3% for the sale managed by the state, and 3% community impact fee, which is paid directly to the town.
The total tax on it is 15%, but we only get the 3. The state gets the rest.
Everything else, except for retail.
Okay.
And there are other
We've
fees.
passed that 3% retail tax
That-
already in our town,
Yep.
right?
At last town meeting, yep. So if there was a retail store to open, and that's still a big if, there would be a 6% tax for Hubbardston. So 3% community impact of anything sold plus the 3% sales tax.
And again, that 3% community impact ends after 5 years.
It ends after 5
Whereas the
years.
other one can go for the life of the agreement.
As long as the state continues to allow that tax. Now, the 3% could go beyond 5 years, we're just not going to count on that at this
Right.
point.
Right.
Because this is such a new industry. So they have also offered a minimum on that 3% cultivation fee of $150,000 for the first 10,000 square feet of growing. These facilities can be up to 50,000 square feet, and then 25,000 for each additional 10,000, for a total of 250,000 per cultivator. So they might indoor grow just 10,000 They're saying if we don't sell anything and we open, the town will be guaranteed 150 to start, and then 25 for each additional 10,000. Now, they probably won't open 10,000 more unless they're making money, so.
Guaranteed 150 for each cultivator?
For each cultivator.
Okay. Mhm.
That opens. So just because we have 5 HCA's doesn't mean there'll be 5 spots. It could mean one of them finally gets through, and that's
Mhm.
all we get.
Mhm.
So the math that Damon was doing, who does not look like he'll be involved except to help facilitate conversations, was based on if everything opened and everything was great, this is what you would make, which is, to me, overblown, but that's what people proposing these types of things do. So the minimums is what I think my recommendation to the board would be to focus on. So they are offering that, and then 50,000 guaranteed for the retail store. So if they make more than 50,000, we would get up to 3%. The same thing with the cultivator. If they made more than 150,000, that 3% fee, we'd get at least that up to 3% of total sales. So if they did $1 million in business, we would be guaranteed 150 because that wouldn't hit the 3%. But they're saying and betting on making more. So that is one decision point. Do we set minimums, and do we set it at 3%? And then I have others. I don't know how far you want me to go.
I'll do one too. All right. So while we're doing it, so there's a, which I think is important. And it wasn't comments from council, but they have there's a lot of conditions in here. But one of them that there's a late payment penalty. Okay, so within there's quarterly payments they have to make to us, and if they're 5 days late, then they owe us a 5% increase on that payment. Problem is there's no bounded amount beyond a bounded time frame beyond that. So theoretically, they could be 2 years late and it would still cost 5%. So I think there should be a bounded time frame within that. That's in section 4 of page 4 on paragraph C, where whether it's 30 days or whatever, maybe just get council's review on it. But it doesn't say that, you know, theoretically they could just have forever, and would only get that 5% penalty. But yeah, might as well keep going.
So, and I should have said off the bat, Damon and I negotiated. They have agreed to give us $5,000 to put into a gift account in order to cover the costs of these HCA negotiations. So they're paying our lawyers to do this work, start up to $5,000. So we're engaging our counsel at their costs right now for these HCA's. That's already set and negotiated.
And paid for?
We'll be getting the check tomorrow. That's whether or not they come here or not. So I wanted to have the legal costs covered because we have a small budget. We have an acceptable budget. Let's undersell the town. So the some other things that were discussed at the outreach meeting was additional training for our officers in terms of drug detection. There's training called Drug Recognition Expert. The ability to engage with people who appear to be under the influence and whether or not we can detect that. A live access feed for the police department, which they've already agreed to in that outreach meeting, which can be codified in an HCA.
And then the town council sort of cautioned against that though a little bit.
They did. So they said that might add some liability, but it's really up to the town. We wouldn't be the only ones that had a live feed directly in. I did talk to the chief and he said he was fine and welcoming of that as well, so it's kind of a decision point. And then I talked to the chief as well, and he said anyone is free to talk to him about it. He is engaging with this because the town has said that we need to engage with this. So personal opinions aside, if you want to talk to him about it, what he would want to see in any of these, despite in addition to the security plans, etc., is if we did add money for drug recognition training and those types of things, maybe using some of that for the Hubbardston version of a DARE program to get into the schools and to do drug training and awareness to sort of mitigate some of the fears in town about how this will affect children, founded fears.
Mm-hmm.
But as I said on the top, anything that you add in addition to, so let's say we'd like $20,000 a year for drug training for our police department. That is above and beyond the 3%, so they may agree to it. I think they should, but that means it's subject to interpretation.
Not just that, they then have to go to all their other agreements and add that in.
Correct. Which is
So-
why this is a negotiation.
Right, right, so they have to factor that into it's a tricky one.
Dan, when you said if they were late with the payment, would they lose their right to operate from the Cannabis Control Commission?
See, I don't know.
You know, maybe the state, you know, would step in at that point.
There's nothing in here that says anything about anything, so maybe that's the point, right? Maybe there's some sort of language that refers them to that, or refers them to severability of the contract, or whatever else, just something that
Yeah.
protects us more than just 5% at no bounded time frame.
And none of this agreement supersedes state law or the authority of the Cannabis Control Commission. And I didn't want to say it during the outreach meeting because I'm not for or against this. I'm just executing the town's will. The Board of Health and others, they do have some jurisdiction in town, but the CCC controls all marijuana and regulation and licensing, just like the ABCC controls alcohol.
Is the fire department involved at all?
They can be. They'd be involved in, as they would be normally, in inspections and anything outlined by the CCC that they're required to do.
Ryan, in the wording for the, like you had mentioned, if they wanted to pay for training in the police department, could, you know, maybe ask them if they wanted to do a scholarship?
So
That's in here too.
many
that possible?
towns have provisions for investing in local charities.
Yep.
Town council strongly recommended that if you do something like that, that it be a 501c3 charity. Be careful who you pick. Be careful of any connection to anybody in town or anything like that. You don't want any liability there. But sure, any provision like that is what I'm here to hear from you on what you want to do with this agreement.
And there are other things that may not be applicable right off the bat either. So there are other towns that have done things like facility expansion fees. Everything proposed now is based on what our existing bylaws are. There's no agreement that could change our bylaws. So an expansion fee wouldn't necessarily apply because the bylaw would have to get changed first before that would even be applicable. So there's opportunity for modifications later on and unnecessary pieces of this to get worried about up front.
Ryan, can I ask you a question?
Of course.
Through the chair, of course.
I know for a lot of the solar farms, the bonds needed to be posted before, I guess I'm not entirely sure why, but could something like that be done in this case again if they're guaranteeing a minimum of $150,000 for 5 years? Would they be willing to post a bond to guarantee that money? And talking about sort of like the late payments or something, like would that be possible? Is that
Craig, what were those for? Were those for like putting up the like the landscaping and stuff later on? Remember there was like I remember discussion
Wasn't
of
the bond for dismantling that?
or maybe
down
that
the road?
too or something like that. Yeah. All right.
Disposing.
walk away.
Yeah.
And I think it was in the form of cash.
It was a cash bond.
Yeah.
But I'll ask. And if it can be done, it should be. It feels like it might belong in the special permit process, but I'll make sure. Which is the next and much harder part of this process is
Right.
the special permit process, which is codified in the town bylaw.
Yep. Okay. Got anything else you wanna that you noted that we should be talking about?
Those are kind of the heavy hitters and the decision points that I'd like to bring to council. And timeline matters here. So if you were to make decisions tonight, council could have this ready and negotiated for your next meeting to sign. It can go that quickly. You don't have another meeting until March, so if you wanted to continue this discussion, we wouldn't have an HCA in place until the beginning of March, which is fine, but that'll delay all the processes, and it's something to know. So we can move as fast or slow as you want.
So say that again. So what we are discussing a draft agreement right now.
Yes.
Say again. What?
So move as fast or slow as you want. So if you decided all these things that you wanted in, you could see a draft of what that looks like at your next meeting, and make a decision whether or not you want to approve it.
And you said the next meeting is in March.
We don't have another meeting in February because of school vacation, because we always have quorum problems for that, so we pushed the next one out till March 2nd. So, it'll either be wrapped up in a week or 5 weeks, or it can go further, but the farther you go, the more we're holding up the process.
Right.
Well, I mean, as I sort of alluded to before, I mean, I think we're hitting all the points that we have to protect the town, so I think we just move you know, not super fast, not super slow, just as sort of we should. So we should probably ask council to take our comments here and answer some of the questions that we've had, and then prepare a draft agreement for our next meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
Yep. I just wanted to point out on page 5 there, the local vendors and employment. It's just, I think that's really great. It's to the extent such practices and implementation are consistent with federal, state, and municipal laws, regulations, the company will make every effort in a legal and non-discriminatory manner to give priority to local businesses, suppliers, contractors, builders, and vendors in the provisions of goods and services called for in the construction, maintenance, and continued operation of the establishment, and it goes on and on. I just think that's a good provision for the town, you know, to provide some jobs.
Yeah.
That came up at the meeting that you weren't at, in the discussion, Jamie, because I asked a question, and the state requires it, that job be offered to the local community, but it doesn't require that only the local community
Yeah.
get hired. They just
Yeah.
have to be offered it, and that's in the state requirements,
Yeah.
so.
That's good.
Okay, and then it goes on taxes wise, is, you know, talks about how everything is subject to normal sort of taxes, and in the event that you know, there's any sort of desire to flip the ownership or any of that, that has to be in writing and agreed to by us, and all the normal sort of protections that would be in an agreement like this.
Having some say in who owns the property or manages the property is also something in here, that they need to be Cory checked, and the board has some say in who manages these establishments.
And I think it's just so everybody knows, the fee, all right, whatever percentage that the town gets for this, it does define what it's supposed to be used for, and it's pretty much everything that a town does, so it's not very restrictive, I guess is what I would say. I mean, it's really supposed to be an impact fee, the impact fee specifically. But if you look at the definition of what it's for, it's just basically normal operations for a town. So it's not like when we get a fee for the from the cable company to, you know, we can't use it to buy a police cruiser or something like that. This is pretty well wide open on what the uses can be to improve the community.
I had a question. Assuming everything goes through and then they're up and running, is there local oversight involved, or are they subject just mainly to the state making sure that all things are being done that are supposed to be done as they're operating?
It's up to us. So the agreement has in there that at least once annually, the town has the ability for police, fire, whatever sort of inspections that we want to do, and that can be increased as well. So I think it really, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I read it is it's really up to the town about how much we can even put in. It's even in there that we can put in planted, no pun intended, planted, you know, representatives of the town to go buy stuff to try to figure out how stuff's going. So it's kind of up to us on how much oversight we want to give.
Yeah, the police chief is tied quite a bit to the security planning. That's not public information.
Right, he mentioned that at the meeting, the gentleman.
That's a guarantee. Nothing we do can supersede state law, but state law does allow some local, and we really would want the state to control that. We don't have the resources like these organizations do, so.
Right.
But yeah, we'd have some authority, deferring when appropriate to the state.
I noticed one recommendation that just says we recommend the agreement be in place for the life of the establishment. So,
yep.
Even if for 5 years, I suppose then that's when the state law would supersede.
There's gonna be something coming that says what to do next, but they're just trying to roll this out right now with minimal money and staff, so.
Yeah.
But we'll get guidance.
It's dangerous, huh?
Everything else would stay in place though, right?
Yeah, it's been slow though, so
Yeah.
at least there's that.
Yeah, true. Okay, anybody else have anything else, either at the table here or out in the audience to contribute to this?
So I think I heard it touched on earlier, but there is, you know, an exit strategy if this all doesn't pan out right, and the town is covered with a bond or something. Is that for dismantling facilities and, you know?
It's on
I
my
think
list.
this might be a different thing though than solar panels, cause solar panels, they're toxic and everything else to they're basically putting up a building.
Right.
So how, you know, I don't know if you could hold them to the same standards as a solar panel. It's a good idea, but I mean, they're basically putting up a greenhouse.
I'll ask.
Or if they
Talking
live
more
like-
of a performance bond.
There was
right?
chemicals or,
Yeah, I mean,
or
they're gonna
fertilizers.
guarantee a
Right.
minimum of
They walked away.
$150,000, and we're only gonna collect a 5% late fee, you know, to have that money that we know
Set
we're
aside.
set aside for, yeah, it's not for not if it, but just to guarantee us that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'd like to, I'm guessing we were not the only ones who have ever asked it, but it'd be nice to hear from
You never
town, so.
know.
I know. I'm kinda hoping we are.
Okay, good.
Okay. Anything else from anyone?
So
Okay.
I'll bring that back next week.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Okay, so next is the Ragged Hill RFP approval.
So can we just close our meeting, I guess, then, or we-
Yes.
well said. So we'll make
We
a
should have
motion.
closed ours too, because we no longer.
Make a motion, second.
Yeah.
And after, when John left.
Okay, we'll note that in the minutes.
7:38.
As lo-
38, yeah.
Alice and Craig, as long as you don't share your opinion, you're good with open meeting law. You can ask questions and absorb.
Alright, thanks guys.
Have a good evening.
You too.
Good night. Thank you.
Alright, again, so Ragged Hill RFP approval. Sort of taking the next step on this, Ryan?
So the board, we've talked about this a couple times now, so this is selling the 4 lots. I just wanted to put the map up, 'cause it makes it easier. And just confirm one talking point. So this is the 4 lots, parcels numbered 217, 218, 219, and 220. 33, which is just below the colored in section here, that's the land swap, which we've been communicating with again, so I'm hoping that happens someday. Right now, we have parcel 217 designated as potentially an affordable housing spot, although we can't target Habitat for Humanity. A group like that would be involved, and council is working on a RFP to get that into someone like that's hands. to
Ryan,
turn-
which is is that the one on the bottom?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. so-
Okay,
So
thank you.
the last lot here.
That's the land swap for the land next to the lot across from the rec field.
Yes.
33 is.
33 is.
Yeah.
That's when we're swapping with the Vincent family.
Mhm,
So
okay.
217 is what the board told me would be the best lot to turn over to a nonprofit to create some affordable housing in town. So then the lots we're talking about, if that's true, then the lots we're talking about selling are lots 218, 219, and 220, which are appropriate for building and valuable lots. So the RFP, because we're disposing of town property, we need to follow mass general laws and put this out for bid. I know the board knows a lot of this is putting out for public consumption. The RFP is pretty standard. Worked with council to draft this. What would happen next if the board approved this request for proposal, or if add some comments and next week were to approve it, is it would be advertised for approximately a month. So in say 2 weeks, we'd advertise it for 1 month. So by the end of March, we'd have bids in, and the bids would allow us to dispose of this land and put it into the hands of someone who wanted to use it. So-
And at any time, reject all the bids and
Yeah.
bail. So we're committing ourselves to nothing.
Correct. So an RFP is just saying, hey, we're thinking about doing this. Who wants to do something with it? Let us know what you want to do. So some decision points, because the RFP is pretty standard and statutory, would be, does the board want to put in a minimum for each lot? Now, if it came in under what you wanted to do, you don't have to sell it, but you might want to signal to potential buyers that you're not going to sell it for X. Just saves you from getting lowball
Yeah.
bids. So talking about a minimum would be important. Another decision point is you can advantage something like affordable housing here. So I know I heard the board talking about wanting to do something about affordable housing. So you could say we will entertain proposals that include elements of affordable housing that still meet the minimum. If this advantaged language would allow you to accept something that was not the highest bid, but something else, because you thought it was an advantage to the town to have an affordable housing element to it. So it's just a way to maybe create some for affordable housing if you want. It does not need to be in there, it's just an option. You can also advantage anyone else in any other way if the board's thinking something like that. And then lastly, how soon you want to get this out. So this is 3 of the decision points in here that we need to finalize a draft.
Well, I think we'd have to first kind of compare and see what on average decent lot is going for
Okay.
in town in order to come up with a minimum.
Yep. Yes.
You kind of sell 3 as one bid for the 3, or allow people to bid one on just one of the 3, or separately, or have you thought about that?
This RFP says each one will be treated individually, but
Okay.
a person can put in multiple bids.
Okay.
So that prevents, you have to be the highest bid in each to get them.
Okay. Yeah.
Which I think is the right way to go.
If you really want all 3, you have to pay hopefully a little bit more, help the town out.
Okay, so the way we would find that out is we'd go to the MLS property listings or some sort of other method of figuring out what recent
You'd
purchases.
probably go on recent transfers
Right.
on lots, you know.
In town or in
Yeah.
similar towns, sort of thing. And I don't know if this time of year, again, I'm just not a real estate agent, so I don't know that winter is the best time to sell. I know it's not been a bad, horrible winter, and I know you probably think
Yeah,
that you're
like-
out there all the time, but
No, it might be better in the
Right.
spring.
Yeah, get it ready for spring.
Yeah, it'll be
Get it
springtime
ready
before
for
we even
April.
So
get
this
all
would
our ducks in a
close
row, right?
in late March, so it might be the right time.
okay,
Yeah, so-
alright, that works. Late March, yeah,
It's another question. I do have someone that's interested in this and keep asking me.
okay.
The perk test, these lots, the Habitat, Carolyn Reed said when they went out, there was indication that they had at some point been perked.
I think
But maybe they have
No,
expired, or,
yeah, they might be expired, but I'm
They all perked.
pretty sure they all perked.
but I guess the question is, would you take a bid subject to a successful perk?
So we are selling them as is.
That's it.
With
So
no
the risk
conditions.
passes to the builder.
I mean, that's up to the board, but my recommendation is, this is something that
Didn't-
you need to pay to do the research
Yeah,
if you wanna buy
when
it.
Vincent's, we did the land swap, didn't they pay for their own perk to make sure it perked?
We can provide that information with the RFP though, whether or not it's applicable, cause it's, expired or not is still information
Yeah.
for
There must be
information
something
only
on
sort of
file.
thing, right?
Yeah, we just don't wanna make any,
No, I think, yeah, right, but I think for information only and, no guarantees sort of thing, but
Or could it be subject to perk, or? And then we may have files at the Board of Health.
I think there is files there from when they perked them years back.
Well, I mean, we can provide those perk tests as information, like Dan said, and then sell them as is. Say, oh, by the way, 20 years ago or 25 years ago, these all perked fine.
Yep.
But you may wanna get that checked depending upon what you're planning on doing with it.
Yep.
To get a more accurate test done.
Yep. Okay. So,
so, I can bring that information for you, and, is there any other considerations that the board would want to put on? So just saying you advantage it means that you can consider it above other things, it ties you to nothing, and that can be anything, any type of.
there's always that question about the minimum, and I just do it because I bid on stuff every day of my life pretty much for work, and it's like a double-edged sword. It's like, okay, yeah, you put a minimum because you don't want somebody to lowball it necessarily, but then you put a minimum and somebody says, well, that's I'm gonna try to do that amount,
Yeah,
whereas they may do more, they may want to do more, especially if it's more valuable than that, so it's kind of a tricky one to.
I honestly don't think we're gonna get a lot of, last time we put out, we
We
didn't
had a
get
big
anything.
bet zero, man, like
So
twice.
maybe just leave the minimum out of it.
Yeah, I think I'm there too.
Cause we don't have to agree to anything.
Right.
If it's a low,
Yeah, and then
if it's
that's,
below what we think is market, then we just won't do it.
Yep, I agree.
Okay, so I'm hearing,
Do we have any constraints on the properties if in fact it is designated for affordable housing as to what the minimum or maximum could be that for cost, I guess?
I don't think so.
No? Okay.
no. They would have to send a proposal of what they plan to do
Mm-hmm.
to make it an affordable housing option.
Okay.
And then they would do that legwork. So there is money in that, if someone wanted to do that, that helps out the town. Makes the lot probably worth a little bit less, but, helps us in other ways, so.
Okay, so do you have enough info from us, you think?
So no minimum,
Yeah,
I would say
I
no.
would leave the
Yeah.
minimum
Fine
out.
with that.
Okay.
No minimum.
Okay.
any advantage, or just wanna see what comes in?
Yeah, I think see what comes in.
And then, like, this time, if they don't go this time, we'll probably have to do a perk test. You know, I mean, because you're spending a lot of money on something that you don't even know if it's gonna perk. You know, I mean, I think they're buildable lots, no problem, but
I know we perked these things.
Yeah.
Or they were
You did?
perked.
Okay, alright.
Cause,
Yeah,
I mean,
they
it was
were
even
perked.
like as 6-7 years ago, we thought we were, it just the market wasn't there for it,
Mhm.
you know, but somehow we gotta dig that up and find that data.
Okay.
Board of Health.
Yeah.
So we can bring this back next week
Yeah.
for an approval?
Yep.
Alright, then yes, I have everything I need.
Okay. So next is the Board of Selectmen to Select Board discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's getting close to the point where a majority of towns have moved the language of their board from selectmen to select board. So I brought it up to your chairman as to whether or not we wanted to discuss it heading into town meeting season, a possible change.
I said absolutely not. Of course.
I think it's a no-brainer, you know.
So what this would entail is, first of all, the board wanting to invest some time in this, but it's simply a bylaw change and amendment that would go in front of the town meeting, and it would change all the language in our charter, bylaw, et cetera,
To select board.
to select board. The only reason why I would recommend, the only reason professionally why I would recommend it is, we talk about volunteering and making sure it's open and inclusive and getting as many people as possible. This has shown in some communities to be one way to signal that you wanna do that, so.
Mhm.
Okay.
It
Anyone?
won't cost us anything, right?
No,
So it's done in front of the town meeting, in other words?
yes.
Then does it have to be approved by the state?
The way we would write it, it would go to the state after for approval by the Attorney General, but
Okay,
we're definitely not the first, so.
Yeah, let's do it.
yep, definitely.
We good? Everybody on this side of the table?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, sounds good.
I'll be able to sleep better at night.
Might be fun at town meeting.
Ah, man, I hope it's not. And next is the town administrator evaluation. So you wanna, just give us a quick little, reminder of how long you've been here and what sort of evaluations you've gone through so far?
2 long, arduous years. So, I was on probation, thankfully hired by the board. It's the 6-month probationary evaluation and an annual last year. I'm coming up on my 2nd year with the community,
Which will be when?
February 21st.
Okay.
So by contract and best practice, you are supposed to publicly evaluate me, which is always fun.
And this, this matters to you contractually as well.
It does.
Right.
It does. So, contractually, I am guaranteed what everyone else gets for a raise, whatever the average COLA is. And then if my merit score is something that the board votes for, then I get another 1.5%. But I will remind the board, I did not take that last year because of the budget crisis. So despite earning it, gave it back.
Okay. All right, so we had a process last time. I think Jamie was the compiler.
I think Chris is gonna nominate Chris this year.
Chris, the compiler has asked to see if someone could take over his duties as compiler.
I'm not familiar with the duties of compiler, so
Easiest
I'm
job
not
ever.
Just
comfortable,
gather the
I'm not
information.
comfortable taking over the duties.
Okay. All right, so I'll first define what the compiler is, and you can decide. So we have a 5-page, whatever, evaluation sheet that basically is a numbered rating system that is sort of pretty standard, that, you know, meets or exceeds, or yeah, 1 to 9 in each category, and then it's basically then there's a comment section of sort of at the end of it. And so what the compiler did was, because we couldn't send them all to Ryan, we
So you
could
change 'em.
but right, because he'd mess with it clearly, like Josh would. It's just somebody to basically receive them all from the rest of the select board. Yeah, receive them all from the rest of the select board, and then once all received, then sort of distribute to the full board for us to review them and then discuss. You know, in maybe executive session first. Did we do that with you, or we do it right out in open
I
session?
think we did it right in the open.
The only thing I ask is that I get a chance to see them and individually.
Yeah.
And discuss them individually with you, before public, but I don't need it to be an executive session.
Okay. So anyway, now that being sort of the
If you're gonna give me a 0, I'd just like a heads up. That's
Got it.
basically what I'm saying.
So that the definition of the compiler. Anybody want to be the compiler this year?
Doesn't matter.
Not me.
I nominate Chris.
I don't know if it's nominatable, but a second.
Yeah, that'll work.
If nominated, I will not run. If elected, I will
You
not
gotta
serve.
do something, come on.
All right. So at this point, what I'll do is I will distribute the blank evaluation sheets to everybody. I think I did that last year anyway because I have that, and then we'll sort of just readdress it at our next meeting and decide decide where to send them after that. So we can still start the process, and then we'll figure it out.
Okay.
Okay.
You can send them to me. I'll compile them.
Okay.
It's not that bad.
Thanks, Chris. Compiler. It's like a superhero, man.
But he won't forget that either.
Do I get a cape? Do I get a cape?
You get a badge. I'll give you my hat. Blank. Okay. All right. We got old business. Anyone got any old business? Ryan, you got any? You usually got something on here. No.
Not old business, no.
I have a question for you, though,
Sure.
whether this comes under old business. The meeting that we had and you were up at the school department,
Barry.
Yeah.
I mean, town of Barry.
how did that all go? You said you were gonna let us know, I was just curious.
Which meeting was this?
Oh, was that about the tax, how they set the tax rates for the towns or something?
So you went with another town to talk with Barry about the school
Oh,
assessment
the
process?
school. Okay, I didn't already. So I didn't already bring that up. I thought I already explained. So yeah, no. I guess the meeting I missed, or whatever went the last one. So I went to the town of Barry with Dave from the finance committee, and we got some time on their agenda. I had previously done that in Oakham, and the plan is to do it in New Braintree and Barry as well. No, that was
Okay.
Barry.
Hardwick.
Hardwick as well. Anyway, those are forthcoming. Basically, did the same thing I did in Oakham, which was discussions we've all had, which was let's get together as a 5-townness and align our budget, school budget discussions to not let the schools start the process of the budget by just throwing numbers at us. And again, this was one of these sort of long-term things, like whether or not it can happen this budget season or next budget season or whatnot. But I was up there. I had to be for 45 minutes just talking because they were very receptive to say, you know what, we got to get in there early. We were starting to talk about what months it would be. Would it be next September, where we get together as individual towns and then collectively as a group to say, this is what we can afford, schools. Here you go. Signed, 5 boards of selectmen. Something that they're not bound by it by any means. It's not something that's like in the regional school agreement or whatnot, but it's something that they can't not see, right? Okay, this is what we've got for all the capital stuff that we've got. These 5 towns, these are our plans. This is what we can afford. And so having them have that information early, which is something they've never had, was an idea that both towns so far have been very receptive to, that I've sort of sat and talked to about. as well as many other things. We
Were assessments discussed?
assessments were discussed, and that was something that, that's not really gonna help us. So, OCAM actually had done an evaluation, on when each town's assessments, were, and how, cause that's the part that sort of screwed us this year. There's no real way to get out of it. If we align them all, then sort of everyone gets her at the same time. So it's not a perfect system. You know, it's so dependent on formulas and ratios that don't have anything to do with the regional agreement, but more have to do with what the state determines those are gonna be, that our getting out of it with the simple solution by aligning assessments wasn't gonna help. So, but this, you know, conversations quickly moved on to, you know, getting us all together with the same goal of getting in early there and being proactive and having to do some work to be in front of the schools to make sure that they understand that, you know, we wanna have a voice early on versus just sort of being told, you know, this is what you're stuck with. So, again, process has just begun. It's been to, you know, our town, which we had all discussed, and then 2 other towns, and then 2 more will follow here, and then, I basically said that after all of those have been done, I'm gonna put a report and send it to our board and then all the other 4 boards, for a review, and somehow we're gonna get to a point where, we have sort of a final sort of document of a way forward. Doesn't have to be anything sort of elaborate, but just how we're gonna move forward from there, and then we'll see how it goes. So it's just an ongoing process.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so that was, anything else, old business? No? Okay, TA report.
Okay, it's a good segue into the budget. So I've been meeting with department heads, almost complete with that, to go over their numbers that we'll be presenting to you. We're starting to get our regional assessments and should have a strong handle on state revenue numbers, which, this is old now, the governor did release his budget. So I'm gonna be candid like I always am. State aid went down this year because of our declining veteran benefit payments is finally caught up to us. So our unrestricted went up, but our state aid total went down, which is not good. That's additional revenue for us. We also received our Worcester regional assessment and went up almost 10%, or 27,000, which is not what you want.
That's the retirement
Yes.
board.
So at this point, I can tell you our goal to reduce free cash use in the budget is all but gone, and we're looking at about a $350,000 deficit, with some pretty high projections in the schools. But if they came into the number they did last year, we would have a pretty big deficit to deal with. That's without using any free cash. So that's what I'm looking at right now. All hope is not lost yet, but you know, it always kind of looks like this time of year, but there's a definite hole this year, and some decisions might need to be made. And I can explain that more if you want, or just kind of pass information.
Explained it to us last year that it was coming, and it's here, so, you know, we just have to deal with it.
So it'll be a question of how do you want to address it, you know, a short-term revenue plug, or some pretty severe cuts. Now, if it is truly our year to have the less of an assessment, which I would caution is kind of a fairy tale, but then maybe those numbers will work out. So it's not necessarily doom and gloom yet. But 2 years from now, when it is our assessment term, we've cut the budget so bare that decision is still looming. So that deficit is still in the budget. So just to give some basic context on that for people listening, our total revenue increase for the year this year is about $220,000.
And this is from new growth,
From new growth, new taxes, local receipts, and then those hits.
pilot agreements, whatever.
And state aid. Everything is about 220,000. So for every 1% of the Quabbin budget, it's 50,000. So if we had 6% again this year, you'd be looking at negative 80,000 before you even started touching contractual agreements on the town side, anything from Worcester Regional or Monty Tech, etc. So that is the deficit that exists and looms. But by the time your March 2nd meeting, when I do my budget comes, we'll know a little bit more where we are, and obviously I'm gonna have some professional recommendations on what we're supposed to do, and we'll get it done.
And just, you know, because we gotta talk about it, like big boys and girls, you know, the Quabbin Regional School Committee feels as though they did an absolutely fantastic job last year because their total assessment only went up 1.9% across the 5 towns. So their total budget only went up 1.9%, which is low. And I agree with them. Ours happened to be so high, it started at 8+ and then whittled down to 6 or whatever, 5 point something. But overall, their increase was small, and they know it, and they feel as though, even though I don't believe they did a lot of cutting to get there, that I wouldn't be surprised if they took a victory lap, for lack of a better way to say it, and maybe bump things up a little bit this year.
Yeah, and I know that it can come off as anti-school. You guys might know this. People watching might not. I'm not an anti. I'm a pro-education guy. The problem is when you have $100 and things cost $200, it just has to give somewhere. So either there has to be an increased revenue and taxpayers have to express their willingness to pay more, or you have to make cuts, and then that means service delivery changes. So it's going to be a frank discussion at some point. Hopefully it's not this year. Hopefully we can whittle it down to a manageable number, but it's coming. And that's why I keep talking about things like, so we have that debt reduction coming up in a couple years, right? That's enough to solve some of this budget problem, but that means you can't borrow, right? So that's why I keep saying we need to make a decision on some of these budget things that are coming up and how you want to use those things. Or do you want to fix your budget? Do you want to build buildings? Do you want to address capital? And those decisions after this budget season, you really got to sit down and nail them because they're important.
Okay.
So on the department side, now that everyone's happy and smiling, the staff is completing their self-assessments. After a couple years with me now, they're just excited to do this. So I believe in self-assessments and using the evaluations as feedback tool for our employees. We have an excellent staff right now and had good two-way conversations about self-improvement. So I do an annual calendar for their assessments, and they're being done, their evaluations currently. We started with the Collins Center for our Human Resources project. This is the Community Compact grant we got. We'll have a fully published package of revised personnel policies that we can point to and guide us on the HR side. It's one of our biggest liabilities. They're also going to give you a report. We've asked them to give you a report on some of the liabilities that exist in our HR department, so you can kind of see them from a third party and not just me. They've also told us a couple of the things that we need to fix, so we're addressing that right away. And then Viewpoint Cloud will go live soon in the building department, so we have a fully online and automated building department permits soon, and that includes our inspectors having field ability to enter their permits in from the field and offer feedback to people online, rather than having to call the office and wait for the inspector to get back to you. You'll be able to communicate with them quasi directly. It's still going to take a day or two, but it's going to be a good thing for people who are pulling permits. On the financial management side, our finance team met with Scanlon Associates to finalize the town audit. They'll be at your meeting next week to go over the FY19 audit with you. Overall, we received another clean finding with no material weaknesses. There's always something to improve, and this year some areas were some reconciliation procedures. We talked about that with Scanlon. They believe a lot of it had to do with the transition time, and we've already corrected that in FY20. And then they wanted us to better monitor some of our expenses like health insurance. We've already corrected that with the Quabbin. They wanted an itemized bill, so it's not a huge change, just a best practice. Excuse me. And then capital asset tracking. So we track our assets. I've been doing inventories, as you've seen. They just want that depreciation element to it, which is something we didn't get in our outsourced accounting contract that we will be getting with Kelly in ours now. It just takes a little time. But they'll go over that in detail with you next week. Okay, a lot of grants lately, so I believe you already know, but the DLTA grant for the final master plan chapter was submitted, and we expect to get that. I also submitted a grant to get vulnerability planning done, and we received word late last week. It was embargoed, but I can tell you that we did get that grant, so it's a $20,000 planning grant.
Nice.
I'll be engaging with the staff to go over hazard mitigation and risk as associated with climate change, and that should result in a plan where we can get actionable money for addressing flooding and other problems we have in our town. So that's culvert work and other big projects that we can use funding for from the state.
So who will we help spend that money? Or who will help us spend that money as far as outside firms?
whoever we choose to.
From an engineering standpoint or from a planning standpoint?
So on the planning side, it's gonna be a meeting with
Collins Center.
MRPC tomorrow.
Okay.
To work with them. So that's the initial plan that we put together.
Yeah.
And then that results in a kinda like complete streets, a itemized list of things we can do
Alright.
to think long-term vulnerabilities, and then we can action those. And for us, a lot of it's gonna be culvert work, flooding work, and other stuff that we just don't have the money to address with our operating budget. So it's kind of a long-term thing, but it's good for the town and might knock some of our capital and infrastructure problems off. And then green communities, again, they embargoed the information because the governor wanted to speak at the MMA, but we did get our green communities grant, and we'll be seeing an announcement, one of those big checks soon, and some money to start doing some work in town after a long staff effort.
Alright, sounds good.
I appreciate the staff's helping me with putting those grants together. We're gonna get some state money to do some things, so that's good. Okay, we got 14 computers coming in the next 2 weeks, so that shouldn't slow us down. There'll be mostly public safety computers. We were able to squeeze every dime out of that money we got last year in the capital plan and some of the operating budget to try and solve this end-of-life problem we have with Windows 7. We also brought in some consultants to look at the electrical system in the library. They're going to offer some recommendations. This was part of the Capital Improvement Planning Committee's desire to get more information about what's going on in there. So that report will go to the trustees and help them build their long-term capital plan, which is good. They have some short-term and some long-term recommendations. The low library roof is complete except for the skylight. They'll be coming back to do the skylight fix, pending a inspection by our building commissioner. And then you heard about Cruiser 2 when we were talking to the finance committee. We also had an electrical failure here in the Slade building. So it was a bunch of things, so I don't want to call anyone out, but we had a lot plugged into this circuit that runs from the assessor's office all the way through the senior center.
Wii bowling, wasn't it? Wii bowling.
It was not Wii bowling. I had a space heater, so I'll do my part 'cause it's freezing in here. And then while they were doing some of the senior center work, we had stuff plugged in, and it blew it. It ended up being a faulty breaker and a tripped breaker. It was difficult to diagnose because of the way the wiring works. I'm not an electrician. Finally got it on and fixed, but it took a day or so to get that done. So that wasn't fun. I was working right where Dan is for a day and a half. Economic development. I toured a couple more businesses this month with the EDC. That was fun. We went to see Johan at Edward Jones and Kelly from Go Green Manufacturing. These meetings have been going great. They give us some candid feedback on what we can do to help make businesses more successful in town, and some recommendations about things they see. A lot of stuff about signs, being able to advertise their business, and what we can do to help them grow. And then for employee recognition, I'd like to thank Lori, Reed, and Bobby, who's sitting next to me, who loves public recognition. Both of them took on a significant amount of responsibility with their new roles, being the executive assistant and the town clerk. Both have taken to their roles and have realized, how difficult they are, challenging but fun. Bobby will tell you. And just wanted to thank them for passing probation and moving into these new roles. We're excited for what they're going to do in the second half of their first year and beyond.
Great job. Thanks, Bobby.
Very good. Good job.
So the
We
next,
also got an increase, Ryan, on the Chapter 90 money.
yes. So this came in a bit ago. But once the state comptroller stepped in and told the legislature that they had to actually pass a budget, or he wasn't going to certify that final payroll right before Christmas, they certified a budget. We were expecting probably twice this, but in the compromised budget, we did get a supplemental Chapter 90 apportionment of $35,513. So I'm excited to get that money. I'm a little disappointed it wasn't double that. So that $35,000 I talked to Travis is going to pay for. In order to accommodate some of the paving project this year, we didn't do some line painting and some crack sealing. So that will complete what he had wanted to do this year. He'll be using that for that. That is my report, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. Moving along here, we've got some on here anyway, policies to review. But we don't have any policies to review.
Yes, we gave you a break this week.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's just for you, Pat.
Thanks.
Doubling it next week.
It'll be 7.
And then we have, for appointments and resignations, we've got a couple resignations here. You wanna go over those?
Yeah, so David, who was referenced earlier.
It's a shame.
It is a shame. He was really engaged.
Yes, he was.
And he actually said, and I believe him, that he was debating taking his new really high-powered job in Florida because he wanted to stay involved with the town. I'm like, that's ridiculous. But he
likes
got
golf too much.
he got a great job. He helped us out quite a bit. He was really engaged on the CIPC and the Finance Committee, but he has resigned. And I wanted to get that to you so we can advertise the Finance Committee position as soon as possible. That's a big position, so.
Okay.
And then Nicholas Garcia is one of our part-time officers. He ended up getting a full-time gig, which happens with our part-time officers. So we are now recruiting for a full-time officer and a part-time officer.
How long was he on the force? Ryan, do you know?
Not off the top of my head. I can go look though.
I was just wondering.
Okay, do you want us
I
to
have it
vote?
on a little chart, so I'll.
You want us to vote to accept these resignations
Please.
then?
No,
Oh.
we'll get-
I'll make a motion to accept the resignations as presented.
I'll second that.
Discussion? All in favor?
Yes.
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 Okay,
Probably skip 9.
yeah. Alright, moving on to 10 for Pat.
Yeah.
I'll wait till, we'll load just for a sec, we'll wait till Ryan comes back. For item 10, so minutes to approve, we have January 6th, 2020. Anyone have those in front of them to just confirm who was there and who wasn't?
Everybody,
We were all there.
January 6th?
January 6th.
Yep. Everybody was there.
Okay.
I'll make the motion to approve the minutes of January 6th.
Second the motion.
Any discussion? All in favor? Yes?
I have discussion.
Okay, sorry.
My last name is misspelled. Pareago.
Sorry.
No worries.
We should pick up the fine details.
Any
Chris.
further discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Yes.
Yes. With the amendment, okay. Committee updates, real quick for Town Center Committee, so 5 years we've been a Town Center Committee, and this, I've had to push off a lot of, just because we didn't need to have a meeting monthly like we had for years, so we've now made them quarterly, for the time being until we get a little bit further in the process. And today, actually, we finally have moved a significant step forward. We have a tentative date set. I say tentative because Mass DOT has to approve it for our 25% public hearing, which is a big step. So that looks like it's going to be Thursday, March 5th at 7 o'clock right here. That'll be confirmed and then put out, advertised in as many different ways as we can advertise. And that'll be a real good time to see, what's called a 25%, but what's more like a 90% sort of design of what things are gonna look like. But that'll be a real good time for those who are, specifically those who are, sort of directly affected by what's going on there, to get their 2 cents in to make sure that Mass DOT and our engineers and the Town Center Committee hears what the concerns are. So following that meeting, I think our next, whatever the third Thursday in March is, that'll be our next on purpose Town Center Committee meeting to sort of debrief about the public hearing and then go from there. There's a certain amount of days after that we have a response from our engineering firm to the Mass DOT. We allocated, if you recall, at our last town meeting, 75,000, is that right, Ryan, something like that?
75.
Half of whatever is remaining at that one, with the intention of bringing another article to the town for the final amount in June at annual town meeting, and so everything's sort of moving along as planned, a little bit slower on that public hearing, but at least it's happening, and that's good. So that's it for committees. Any matters? I don't have any matters.
Wage authorization.
Sorry about that. So back to wage authorizations. I tried.
July 2015 for Garcia.
Oh, okay.
Oh wow,
Oh, he's been here a while then.
that is a while. Okay, so wage authorizations. We've got Lori Reed and Roberta Tebow.
So these are contained within their offer letter and our policy and our wage plan, so when you pass probation, you get a small raise. So these wage authorizations are to increase the wage for these two employees as designated in your packet.
Okay.
This is notification.
So I'll make the motion to, for the wage authorizations for Lori Reed and Roberta.
Second the motion?
Discussion? All in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And again, to item 12, matter is not reasonably anticipated by the chair. I don't have any. Anybody at the table have anything they wanna bring up?
No?
No? And then public press question and answer. Anybody out there wanna bring anything else up? No? Okay.
Move to adjourn.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Yes.
Yes. Adjourned at 8:41.
So we do have a meeting next week, and then after that, it's not until a month later in March,
Yes,
correct?
next Monday, and then